It was.
Calm down. Calm down. Now, 20 of His Majesty's soldiers are dead, and I need to know how.
He said there was...
Were you there? Then let him speak. Take your time and tell me, how many were there? Were they militia? Were they regulars?
I don't really remember how many. Maybe one.
One man. Really?
He was on the flank. All around us. Amongst us. I could barely see him. He was there and then he was gone.
Well, he just vanished. Sounds more like a ghost than a man.
Yes, a ghost.
Hey everybody, welcome to Beer Bros History Hour.
Howdy ho.
Today, we're joined by Ben down San Diego way and my esteemed mongrel of a brother, Ronnie, up in Maine with the
Yeah, I weren't shitting you.
So, based on our intro, if you haven't figured it out, we're talking Francis Marion today. Loosely based on the character from The Patriot, known as Benjamin Martin.
You mean the
Yeah,
character from The Patriot was loosely based on him?
Yes, that way.
Yeah.
The way he
let's do a little switcheroo there.
the way he said it.
The dipsy-doo flipperoo.
And actually, that's kind of interesting because we'll get into it as we discuss. Well, I guess we didn't mention quite what we're discussing, but yeah. Well, did we? It's been a crazy day. Francis Marion, aka the Swamp Fox. An interesting note about that because Colonel Tavington from that movie, who is primarily based off of the very real Bannister Tarleton, actually had fought the Swamp Fox in South Carolina. So their conflict was very much at least discussed and touched upon in the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson. So because they actually did fight in real life.
Good. Well, at least in the movie, he got what he deserved.
Yeah, I think in real life, I can look it up, but I believe Bannister Tarleton did survive the war and ended up going to other destinations far and wide.
Well, in the movie,
he died impaled on a rifle and bayonet.
Well, he didn't die being impaled. He died because Benjamin Martin ripped his throat out with another bayonet. So, there's that. There
is that. No, Bannister Tarleton lived until 1833. So he lived a ripe old age. Actually, even for his time.
Well, I mean, it looks like because Francis, we'll just get right into it a little bit here. Francis Marion was a brigadier general, and he was born 1732. So at the time of the Revolution, he was in his 40s. So yeah. The British officer was a much younger man at the time, I believe.
Yes, Tarleton would have only been in his 20s then.
Yep.
And he was quite haughty for his age.
So anyway, Marion died 1795. So,
yeah, at the ripe old age in colonial America. Well, I guess it wasn't colonial at that point, but post-colonial America at 64 years old of age.
64?
Yeah, well, because I was just looking it up. Because sadly, the guy has no descendants. I don't know if he was barren or if it was his widow, but so he left behind no direct descendants. But yeah, he was 64 years old when he died at his plantation.
So we'll just get right off the top here on Wikipedia here. So he was an American military officer, planter, and politician who served during the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War. During the American Revolution, Francis Marion supported the Patriot cause and enlisted in the Continental Army, fighting against British forces in the Southern theater of the American Revolutionary War from 1780 to 1781. So it says here, so that's another discrepancy with the movie, because he was in charge of the militia, and here it says he enlisted in the Continental Army. So how did he enlist and be an officer? And
Well, they're probably just using that in terms of he enlisted in the cause of the American Revolution. Like, I'm
I think
pretty
he
sure,
joined the cause.
like I'm not sure if they had that distinction, 250 years ago.
so
I could be mistaken.
though he never commanded a field army or served as a commander in a major engagement, Marion's use of irregular warfare against the British has led him to be considered one of the fathers of guerrilla and maneuver warfare. And his tactics form a part of the modern day doctrine of the U.S. Army's 75th Ranger Regiment.
See, that's bitching over 200 years later and still having that, lineage, that connection. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, when you're trying to skirmish and not be in a stand-up fight, small unit tactics and maneuvers, even to this day, are more or less the same.
Well, and here's
small
because
and small unit tactics and maneuvers can be very effective against a superior force, and I'm glad that the military adopted more of it.
Yeah.
Well, because he had his baptism of fire in the French and Indian War, actually, just like George Washington and a number of the other senior officers. So he was actually he engaged in frontier warfare against the Cherokees in South Carolina. And also, it was that time when military assistance was sent in the form of British regulars. Marion noted the haughtiness of their officers, so apparently he didn't appreciate that even when he was in his 20s on the frontier. But he was sent with 1,200 men under Lieutenant Colonel James Grant to campaign against the Cherokees. And this is where he really learned and employed maybe the beginnings of those guerrilla tactics as a first lieutenant, because they were in backcountry. It was called the Congaree River, Santee and Congaree Rivers in Cherokee country. And obviously, this is long before Andrew Jackson sent them on the Trail of Tears. So there were still many of them in the southeast. So Marion was directly selected to disperse any Cherokees laying in ambush, even though a number of his men were killed or wounded in a fist fight. A firefight with the Cherokees. It basically gave him. He showed fortitude and didn't shrink in the face of a hazardous mission. So he was already showing tenacity in his mid-20s.
Had the Cherokee obtained muskets and firearms at that time, or were they still mostly,
No, they were,
spears and arrows? And
no, they were, because remember, there was, like, if you remember Last of the Mohicans, both the book and the movie, they were using flintlocks.
okay, so they had been provided firearms.
Yeah, because they had been trading with the French and Spanish and English for probably 100 years at this point.
Well, it says here that he began his military career just before his 25th birthday.
Yep.
When he was recruited by Captain John Postel to serve in the South Carolina militia. And that was during the French and Indian War. And then I think after that, he saw his action there against the Cherokees.
Yeah, they were going on this kind of, looks like this total war campaign in the Tennessee and Tuskegee valleys, like burning villages. This is what the British officer was ordering. And it was during these frontier engagements where Marion learned many tactical lessons. And by the way, I'm referencing Warfare History Network for, just to be intellectually honest. So especially the effectiveness of long-range rifles over muskets, advantage of hit-and-run strikes, and the effectiveness, and this is what I was going for, of scorched earth tactics. So he just had he was just sitting on this valuable knowledge for 15 to 20 years before he employed it against his former British comrades. Because once the revolution started heating up, and the revolution really started kicking off even in the 1760s, shortly after the British won the French and Indian War. Because at that time, that's when they started laying those heavy taxes on the colonies to pay for the cost of the war. Like the Stamp Act, for example, that was a direct cause of the French and Indian War. They had to raise taxes, and that's what started kicking things off. So he and his brother were elected as delegates to the first provincial Congress of South Carolina. So probably the same thing that Benjamin Martin was selected as a delegate for, I guess, in the movie. So yeah, I think they pretty much based Benjamin Martin off of Francis Marion. Because wasn't Benjamin Martin also a French and Indian war veteran?
Yeah, yeah, because
That's right.
every
Fort
you know
Wilderness.
all the guys in the militia, after they recruit their militia, are talking about um, his exploits in the French and Indian War.
Yeah.
Just ask the French. What did they say? The French,
Like,
they know what he done.
the hell with the French and the hell with the French army. He's like, we got Benjamin Martin. We've seen what he done to the French.
So at this point, by the mid 1770s, Francis and his family were fairly wealthy, because I didn't see much of, I don't know if you discussed their early history there. But they had a 350, wow, so they had a 350-acre tract north of Charleston, and this was in the 1730s. So obviously by the 1770s, they were well off and they had economic ties with the crown. Nonetheless, they were staunch patriots. And it seems like he stayed kind of just political at first, because obviously he wasn't like a young man at this point. But he was in 1775, after April 1775, elected as a captain of the 1st and 2nd South Carolina regiments. And then he recruited, so like Benjamin Martin, he recruited along the Santee, Black, and Petey Rivers. He recruited 60 men, and he drilled them himself, because obviously he was already a skilled captain of and a vet, so he didn't have to read a book. He was the book.
Yeah.
And then so right now we're not even at the stage where he was a frontiersman yet, because he led a detachment against a British Fort Johnson guarding the approaches to Charleston Harbor. There was only a detachment of 5 men there, so they took 5 British prisoners. It's kind of funny. And then it's talking about, so it's really seems like 1780 where things really kick off, with his with his frontier warfare. I mean, he was involved in a battle when British frigates attacked his fort on June 28th, 1776. This was at Charleston Harbor. But I mean, I'm not trying to ignore everything that this guy has done. Okay, so let's get down to 1780. So Marion actually suffered a severe injury to his ankle in March 1780. And actually, this was kind of fate playing out. This is a little bit of divine providence here. So he was sent back to the country. And on March 29th, 1780, Henry Clinton, he was a British lieutenant general, invaded Charleston with 10,000 man British army. The fort sustained a bombardment, and then they surrendered the fort about a month and a half later on May 11th. So Marion would have been captured had he been there. So that ankle injury was kind of a blessing in disguise.
Did you happen to mention the story behind his nickname, the Swamp Fox?
Well, I figured we're getting there because this isn't even. I think what led to the whole Swamp Fox was with the fall of Charleston, if that's what I'm reading here.
It was with
It's
Ben Tarleton. See,
huh?
it was
Yeah,
with that
Bannister
Bannister.
Tarleton.
Yeah.
No, but what I mean yet,
But it's,
I don't think he had become the Swamp Fox yet, though, because like he was like assisting, for example, in like the fortifications of Charleston for a few years. Like he was on the front lines on the coast, helping protect the city.
what it says here is the British made repeated efforts to neutralize Marion's force, but Marion's intelligence gathering was excellent, and that of the British was poor. So that was due to overwhelming Patriot presence in the Williamsburg area. So Colonel Bannister Tarleton was sent to capture or kill Marion in November 1780. After pursuing Marion's troops over 26 miles through a swamp, Tarleton supposedly said, "As for this old fox, the devil himself could not catch him."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know if that's like an urban legend or not, but that's where the name did come from.
What he said, based on this tale, Marion's supporters began calling him the Swamp Fox.
Well, again, because those like guerrilla operations seem to really kick off after the fall of Charleston in May 1780, because then Cornwallis was actually having some pretty stunning victories in the Southern campaign. And to detour real quick, like the Southern campaign in 1780 was basically meant to reverse their fortunes because, at this time in the North, the British were getting pretty well beaten. Like it wasn't going well for them at all. So the Southern campaign started off with the fall of Charleston and I think also Savannah, if I'm not mistaken. So we lost two colossal forts on the coast. And then Cornwallis beat General Gates, I think Horatio Gates, at Camden, South Carolina in August 1780. So at this point, that's when Marion was ordered to take charge of the militia north of British Crown occupied Charleston. And so this is when he started operating from the upper Santee River and starting his guerrilla tactics. So for example, shortly after the Battle of Camden, he launched a night attack. So here we go with night attacks on a British outpost that resulted in rescuing 150 Patriot prisoners, in addition to the capture of 20 British guards. And they even informed the Continental Congress of his success. And so this actually also let the British know that South Carolina actually wasn't as safe as they thought it had been for the crown. So that set them on edge. He went on to win 2 more victories in the first month of his guerrilla campaign. Of course, and what people don't realize in the Carolinas especially is that there was a massive Tory presence, meaning native-born American colonists who were loyal to the crown. The southern colonies were actually loaded with Tories. So this is where, and that was actually basically a civil war. It was probably our first civil war, to be intellectually and historically honest. Like you had a lot of frontier militia leaders killing people, burning livestock, burning farms. Apparently, Marion refrained from this behavior, but he didn't quite have control of his subordinates. Like it's no different than like, do you remember seeing Ride with the Devil years ago?
I don't think I saw that one.
No,
it's
I never
pretty
saw
damn.
that one.
It's actually pretty good. It's kind of super underappreciated, but it's about the Confederate raid on Lawrence, Kansas. But it just shows you the brutality of the frontier war that just kind of got set aside because people were mostly focused on Gettysburg and the Eastern campaigns. But like it was the same thing in these frontier battles with the Tories and the Patriots. So
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
If we went back in time and gave George Washington a nuclear bomb, and we told him all the implications and consequences of using it, do you think he would use it?
Absolutely not. He was like George Washington wasn't a wuss by any chance. Like remember he called what's his name? The fat general?
Oh,
Henry
I can't remember his name. We talked about him not last week.
damn. What's that mansion in Maine in Thomaston? Now I can't think about, he
Over
called
you
him,
swamps the boat guy.
yeah, but in front of all of his working class
Is it Knox?
yeah, yeah, Knox, thank you. In front of all of his working class soldiers and sailors, he called a fellow general officer a fat ass. So it's not like he was some priss, but at the same time, he wasn't a monster. So no, I definitely don't think he would and he didn't need it at the end of the day. Now, like I think that's where, like, you talk about Guns of the South, for example, that alternative history book, and it's like, yeah, the Southerners probably would have taken AK-47s if they were offered.
Oh, that's your executive order authorizing full use of our nuclear deterrent, sir.
Oh, I think if you had given them one to end the war, they'd have probably shipped it to London with some spies and smuggled it in somewhere into
Yeah,
London.
but see, the thing is,
it.
back then, they had no knowledge of radiation or fallout. I mean, unless
yeah, but I think the whole point was they'd be told about everything about it, right? Wasn't that the scenario?
Yeah, but the thing is would they believe you?
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm telling you that I would think that if you gave them something like that and told them the implications and what would happen, it probably wouldn't be used here. But if they had the means to ship it to London and just run it right up the fucking Thames with it on a ship as far as you could get it and detonate it, you probably could have leveled a good part of London.
Well, I think they would have. I think they would have been better off using it. Like if they were going to use one, it would have been better off used against the British fleet.
like the blockade.
Something.
I was just thinking more on a tactical standpoint. You cut the head off the snake, and you're done with it.
At that point, though, the forward operating commanders were on their own, so it's not like they were receiving constant direct communication from London.
Right, but eventually word would have trickled down through soldiers and ships coming from across the ocean that hey, London's gone. Imagine how demoralizing that would be. The king's dead, the royal family's dead, Parliament's gone. There's no government.
All of the crumpets are gone.
Was there a parliament back then?
Yeah, it's been around for centuries.
Since the Magna Carta, right?
The Magna Charta, yeah.
Didn't the Magna Carta establish a parliament? Isn't that part of?
Well, it's kind of like it's often considered like a forerunner of the Constitution because the founding fathers made numerous references to it. Now, granted, it was more so talking about the rights of the nobles, but still it was a step in the right direction. And that was in the year 1215. So we're talking about the Robin Hood time frame.
Mm-hmm.
But like the Patriot founders were intimately aware of the Magna Carta and applied it to our own declaration. But I mean, so he was just getting back to our friend here. So he just kept rolling on with successes because again, Cornwallis was rolling up the Patriots until just Marion started striking him and on his flanks and at the rear, basically letting him know that this ain't a cakewalk.
Yeah,
So
attacking his supply trains.
On September 4th, at a location called Blue Savannah, he had a force of 53 men, and they defeated a Tory force 5 times its size. So that's just wild. And the Tories fled into the nearby swamps. 10 days later, they yet again routed a Tory force commanded by an officer named J. Cumming Ball at a place called Black Mingo Creek. So in this case, he divided his force up. And again, look at the creeks, swamps. That's where he's striking these people at. He struck Cummings' flanks. And yet again, they fled into the recesses of the swamp. And at this point, Tories retaliated by burning the farms of known patriots. So that was their response to his tactics. And it's at this point where the British just really started funding Tory militias to combat him, because he was obviously interrupting their operation. So actually, they managed to enlist a man named Samuel Tynes, who was actually a turncoat. He had been a patriot, but then he switched his loyalty back to the crown.
You know, what's funny about that, Ben, is that, I think probably 90% of the time history has taught us that, attacking the homes and families of the people you're fighting is not really a good tactic, because it more or less bolsters resolve and bolsters the numbers of your opposing force, because people flock.
Yep. And actually, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. And I think what we need to talk about another time are the Over Mountain men, who are some of like the baddest asses who served in the Revolution, because these were like your Scotch-Irish settlers in Appalachia and all throughout the Carolinas and Tennessee and whatnot. They just wanted to be left the hell alone. These are people who are probably distilling liquor that they learned back in Ireland. They didn't want any part of it. They were mountaineer. They were mountain men. These are some of my ancestors, possibly. And what the British did, they really fucked up by threatening these people. And we're not even talking about Tarleton. I don't know if he made it into North Carolina. But they fucked up. They threatened their families. They basically sent out they posted messages saying they'll like burn farms and kill livestock and other things. So like 1,000 to 2,000 Over Mountain men had a rendezvous. They saddled up and they just killed a bunch of Tories at the battles of King's Mountain, which is a very famous battle. But it was that threat, and that killed Cornwallis's southern campaign, King's Mountain. He lost one of his top officers at that battle. He was killed. Lost basically an entire force. But yeah, I think that's a great talk for another time. Is the Over Mountain men? They were some severe badasses. So at this point, and by the way, even after they started raising more militia, yet again on October 25th, under the cover of night. So you see, he has a strategy of night attacks as well. He inflicted 43 casualties and rounded up 80 horses at this battle. It's not quite saying where they were encamped. So this is where Tarleton comes into the picture, also known as Colonel Tavington from the Patriot.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
Hey, hold your thought. I just have something to throw into the mix. But I think it's kind of funny that some of our best generals in history, I mean, it seems that a lot of them started out in the artillery and moved on to other stuff.
Well, that's interesting you say that.
It takes a lot of that.
Well, Stonewall Jackson was artillery, and that seems to be pretty true. Like, he was obviously one of the best American generals. That's not even in dispute, no matter what wokesters try to say about him today. He was artillery. Who else did you have in mind?
I mean, I wasn't really thinking of anyone specific, like their names. I mean, I could find some, but I just happened to be thinking it was a random thought, and I can't remember specifics, but I'd heard that.
Napoleon is artillery.
Yeah.
Actually, Napoleon built this whole West Point studied Napoleon, pretty extensively, and
They still do.
naturally you would, right? So artillery played a pretty big role even in the for the Southerners as well. I'm sure it played a role for both sides, but like Mexican American War, for example. I mean, I don't mean to deviate, but the Mexican American War, artillery was huge in taking like Chapultepec, Buena Vista, other Mexico City, and that was Winfield Scott. So yeah, you're right.
Hmm.
But yeah, so this is where Mr. Bloody Mr. Tarleton comes into play. He comes into the story. So he was obviously a highly trained, albeit young, mid-20s British officer. And he led what was called the British Legion. He is like, as featured in the Patriot, he was actually brutal to prisoners of war, and the pursuit of the enemy. So that was actually a fair depiction in the film, not one of Gibson's blandishments.
Yeah.
Embellishments.
Like I wonder if Cornwallis ever really had that conversation with him where he had to tell him, look, these colonists are our brethren, and when the war's over, we'll reestablish commerce with them. Surrendering troops will be given quarter. These brutal tactics must stop.
Well, again, like any officer, any strategist with common sense, they had to have existed back then, knows, hey, if we brutalize these people, they're going to strike back at us. Like,
right, and you bolster the numbers of the resistance.
Which is exactly what happened.
Anyone in the frontier, in the field, that is watching their countrymen be slaughtered and brutalized when they're trying to surrender, if they were on the fence about joining the resistance before, now you just threw them into the resistance.
Yeah. Then he turns around and tells Cornwallis, he's like, I wasn't born to a wealthy family. He's like, I advance myself only by victory. He's like, no, you advance yourself only through my good graces.
Well, because see, that's exactly what happened. So I don't know, because you had the Battle of Waxhaw, or also known as Buford's Massacre, which occurred in South Carolina, and where Bannister Tarleton was the commanding British officer on the field, and 113 Americans were killed, while only 5 Brits were killed during the battle. And and actually, not to go off on a tangent here, but this massacre is what essentially motivated a lot of frontier people in the Carolinas to take up the Patriot cause, because like this was there's 2 people who really royally fucked Cornwallis's Southern campaign. Bannister Tarleton was one, and then there was, I'm trying to remember what the British commanding officer at Kings Mountain was, but I'll find it out real quick. Because these 2 guys, like Patrick Ferguson, they just fucked it up for Cornwallis because of their tactics. So, but yeah, as you were mentioning, so again, back to Francis Marion. He's had like strings of marvelous success from late August and until late October. I mean, he's struck the British multiple times, routed Tory forces, which of course again is like a civil war in the Carolinas, and then you throw in Tarleton, who's basically playing a cat and mouse game at this point. Apparently, Francis Marion turned the tables on Tarleton and made him have to seek refuge in the swamps at some point, which is kind of funny. I didn't know. I didn't know about that. And at this
Francis
point,
Marion killed 50 men. 50,
50,
if it was one.
like Moses through the Red Sea.
100 men.
We'll make spears, long spears, hundreds of them, twice as long as a man.
Not long. Some men are longer than others.
Yeah, mother's stories about me again, eh?
Jesus.
So, I mean, then it just goes into some history here, like Nathaniel Greene, Major General Nathaniel Greene replaced the incredibly incompetent Gates. Because again, the Southern American forces were really suffering at this point. And I mean, look, Cornwallis still made it up, into the Carolinas. Like they had major battles in the Carolinas, so it's not like their efforts were halted in South Carolina. But the fact was, Francis Marion's efforts probably tied up a substantial number of vital forces in South Carolina, which could have been used to bear on the Patriots in the North.
I'm
So
curious. There's a battlefield right by where we used to live in North Carolina, Andy, in Alamance. There's a battle.
yeah, you have
like
Alamance in Greensboro. You got the Battle of Greensboro Courthouse, or not actually
yeah,
Guilford
those were
Courthouse.
Rev
That's what it's
War
called.
battles, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
and see the thing about North Carolina too, like they actually had like essentially a miniature civil war going on before the Revolution started, because you had skirmishes between like pre-war patriots and what you called the regulators in like the early 1770s. So they were kind of popping off years before the war kicked off.
so is it like that song, Regulators?
I'm
You can't be any geek off the street. You got to be handy with the steel, if you know what I mean. Earn your keep.
I
Damn Colonel Tavington, damn him, damn that man.
So now we get into 1781, which of course is the final year of the war. So essentially, he's been operating at least as a guerrilla for about 10 months at this point. So he was working at this point in conjunction with Robert E. Lee's father, Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee. Let's see.
He's a cavalry officer.
Yeah, cavalry officer. Yep. He actually had similar training and allegiance similar to Tarleton. So these were more professional Continental cavalry. Now look, Marion wasn't always successful because it seemed in this he had a joint operation with Lee attacking the town of Georgetown, a garrison there, and that was on January 24th, and the attack failed. They failed to capture the towns. So, however, that just reminded that reinforced to the British that Marion was still very much a serious threat. And apparently Tarleton wasn't enough. So Cornwallis dispatches Lieutenant Colonel John Watson Tadwell Watson. He had Watson in his name twice. That's stupid.
Oh, Christ. Elementary,
John,
my dear Watson.
John Watson Tadwell Watson. Whatever.
Was he a
So
doctor
apparently this
associated with
lieutenant colonel.
Holmes?
Hey,
What's that?
it's not any worse than the giant in Game of Thrones. What was his name? Like Juan de Wangwan?
Oh my God.
So even though this lieutenant colonel was not popular, he struck out against Marion with 300 infantry, 150 Tory cavalry, 20 dragoons, and this was a first for Marion, a 3-pounder cannon. He'd never faced off against forces armed with a cannon before, so this added a bit of a new some spice to his life.
Only a 3-pound?
Yeah, a 3-pounder, but still, this is the first time.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty small cannon, though.
It was, but could still cause some problems, I imagine.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right, you
Like,
try getting hit with 3-pound shot and see how it feels. It's not good.
Well, you probably won't feel it at like, what is it? Probably 2,000 feet per second. You're not gonna feel it.
Now, this was on March 8th, where he faced off against this Lieutenant Colonel Watson, and it was called Weebo Swamp. Marion feigned a withdrawal, luring the British further into the swamp. So he was pulling a fast one on them. Okay, but it was kind of a draw. So actually the artillery, even though it was just a 3-pounder, actually played a role. So the Patriots charged, British countercharged with a bayonet charge. They pulled a Chamberlain, and with the artillery, Marion was compelled to fall back. So again, he it's not like he was indefeatable, but he just never was crushed and captured.
Keep calm, load canister.
And actually, at this point, because of this pitched battle, which I guess was a British tactical victory, Marion began what was called a 2-week bridges campaign, where it was a 2-week running battle. It culminated over the Black River, where Marion's riflemen took cover overlooking a bridge at a nearby ford. The British artillerymen could not depress their barrels sufficiently, and the grape shot went harmlessly overhead Marion's riflemen. They inflicted some casualties on the Brits. They wrecked the bridge, and they abandoned their chase. So yet again, so
Marion and his men found a defilade.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So
where they can't lower their guns enough to hit them.
It doesn't indicate if he strategically knew that, because I don't know what his experience. Well, he would have been familiar with cannons by helping prepare Charleston for the bombardment from the British fleet. But those are probably much larger siege cannons. I don't know what he was working with there.
So, have you guys heard the myth about back in the day people shoving like anything they can down the end of their friggin' cannon to shoot it at the enemy, like spoons, forks, knives, and stuff like that?
Yeah.
The Mythbusters did an episode on that, and they proved it bullshit.
I don't know about that.
They put forks, spoons, and knives down the barrel of a cannon and shot it at some pigs they got from a butcher at a range of like 50 feet. And it caused some minor lacerations and shit on the carcasses, but nothing that would be fatal.
Well, okay, so how many were they shooting at?
Dude, they stuffed as much as they could in there. They were shooting at three pigs side by side.
Yeah, and at a range of 50 feet off the muzzle of the cannon, I mean, they should have been blown. They'd have been blown off their feet.
And this was a Civil War era cannon they were shooting too.
Oh, I mean, I heard it. Well, I don't know, because I was thinking about the siege from the Ottoman-Hungarian Wars, where the Ottomans ended up taking this fort, but it cost them like 20,000 casualties. And one of the last acts of the Christian knights was to like open the gates and like fire 2 cannons directly in the face of the Turks, like killing 600 of them instantly. But you know what? Those are probably regular shots, so never mind.
What I think what the Mythbusters probably screwed up was they didn't put anything in there to take up the gap in space, like, because cutlery isn't gonna take up all the space in the barrel. That gas has plenty of room to escape past the projectiles.
Right. They had to use wadding.
Yeah.
You had to use wadding and then put your shot.
I don't think they put any wadding in there. So
interesting.
Perhaps if they did, they might have caused some more serious injuries, but
yeah, no, that's interesting. No, yeah, you hear about that every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard about it since I was a kid.
Same here, and I'm pretty sure they featured it in movies. I just can't think of what films though that I'm thinking about. Maybe it was
grape shot on them.
Grape shot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
just turned the cannon into like a giant shotgun, basically. Even in Vietnam, right up until the end of Vietnam, like, I mean, the M60 tanks, they had what was called a flechette round, and it basically turned the can. It was an anti-personnel round. It would turn the cannon into like a giant shotgun.
Damn.
And because our friend's dad, he was a tank commander in the Vietnam era, and yeah,
Damn.
he talks all about it. Like if you'd load those up and like fire them on a tree line, you fucking blow the trees down. And it was like giant shotgun, like just like giant shotguns.
Damn, that's fucking scary. Wow.
Yeah.
Did you know the Germans in World War I tried to get us for war crimes for using shotguns in the trenches?
Yeah, I heard
The
about
shotgun.
that too.
The shotgun BOIS boys.
Yeah, they said the shotguns were an unfair advantage, and it was a war.
Says the people who pioneered mustard gas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like, shut the fuck up.
Right?
You guys are using chemical weapons, and we're just using shotguns, some good old boy weapons from the woods.
Right.
You want
yeah,
Well,
because you had a lot of good old boys. Like what's his name? The Tennessee guy who won the Medal of Honor. Fucking get Sergeant York. Sergeant York. So
who are you,
he had a bunch.
York, trying to take on the Germans his damn self?
I heard you captured the whole German army. Nah, sir, 132 of them.
Yep.
But so even after this running battle where the Swamp Fox survived, they repulsed the British attack, and for some reason they canceled they ceased pursuing him in that particular instance. He struck again at this place called Parker's Ferry, inflicted 100 enemy casualties at the cost of only 4 Patriots. And then actually he did attach himself to the larger Continental Army. And here again, so here's the thing, like whenever he seemed to attach himself to a larger force, he didn't have that great of a go, because at Utah Springs, it's called, on September 8th, 1781, a month before Yorktown, they were in a pitched battle against the British. Let's see. Because they were actually, I don't know, you probably heard of the General Daniel Morgan before, who actually beat Tarleton at Cowpens. So Cowpens, I think, was actually featured in the Patriot.
Was he ever previously known as Captain Morgan?
I'm sure at some point, yes.
So,
and he put his boot.
Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I was about to say, no, he just put his boot on the top of a slain Tory.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking of because we were talking shotguns, and interesting story with a shotgun. Just personal story. When I was in the Army, our platoon sergeant would walk up and down the gun line. I don't know. He'd walk up and down the gun line, and just pacing back and forth up and down the gun line, and he had his Mossberg 500. I think it was a Mossberg 500, but that's what he had. That was his weapon, and we called him the warden. The chain gang warden.
Warden, I want my own cell.
So
I just thought it was funny. We called him the warden. That was funny.
Warden, yeah. So this was really one of the last big actions in South Carolina, and it ended up being a pitch battle, because they kind of featured this in the movie. So they were trying to, apparently they'd heard about Morgan's tactics at Cowpens. So his tactic was to deploy militia in the front with ranks of regulars behind them, kind of what they showed in the movie. And they were kind of at skirmish intervals, weren't they? Or were they in regular formation? I forget, in the movie.
In the movie, they were in regular formation.
Well, the militia were in the front, I think, as they featured.
I think the militia formed in skirmish, didn't they?
Well, the militia formed in the center of the Continental Army, so they were right in the middle. They're in the movie.
Well, at this Utah Spring, the militia were in the front. They fired several volleys and then fell back. Several volleys, and they actually got 17 rounds off, which during the course of this this battle. Yeah, they fired several volleys, and they went to fire at will. Apparently, the British were pretty much stunned under this sort of counterattack, especially as they faced off against Maryland and Virginia Continentals. So once they were reeled back by the actual regular army. Apparently, however, when they went through the Redcoat camp, they also seized quite a quantity of liquor, and they proceeded to consume it while the battle was ongoing or perceived to be over. And that that allowed the British time to organize and counterattack. So it ended up as this.
That's friggin' America, though.
Sir, send the entire battalion over that hill and crush them. It ends today.
They drank all my liquor. This ends today.
And that coat they left me as a horse blanket.
Burn it. Very well. It's a nice horse blanket.
So after we defeated and captured Cornwallis, or I don't know if we could say we captured him, but we defeated him at Yorktown on October 19th, 1781. There were actually still some fights in South Carolina after the fact. So the British evacuated.
I got a question, Ben. Yorktown. When we finally defeated Cornwallis at Yorktown, was it depicted in the movie accurately that the French had finally arrived to assist in the taking of Yorktown?
Yeah, the French fleet were at Yorktown.
Okay.
Yeah, because the French actually started getting involved in 1778 after we whooped the British at Saratoga.
We whooped you British twice, as I recollect.
Okay, right, because they needed that. They needed that proof that we could stand on our own before they would commit.
Which is a damn good policy.
Was it Saratoga or Ticonderoga though?
Oh shoot!
I thought it was Ticonderoga when we took that fort.
Well, Ticonderoga was, I think, with Ethan Allen.
Yeah.
That was a little earlier in the war, I think. But let me check on that. No, because I think it was Saratoga, because we took a British commanding officer captive.
Didn't Benedict Arnold have a hand in our taking of Ticonderoga too?
Yeah, he was actually wounded in action at Saratoga when we beat the British. And we took the British commanding officer and most of his officers, John Burgoyne, captive. I mean, it was crushing. But that's what got the French involved. That showed them, okay, these Americans are serious. They can hold their own. But again, I think it's also key because, let's look at Yorktown briefly. That was September 28th to October 19th. It was 3 weeks. So all of those Tories who could have been sent north to assist, to lift the siege, they were being tied down or they had been defeated. Like at Kings Mountain, they were just basically annihilated. I mean, it wasn't even close. And, so Marion just kept probably, I don't know if they've ever done like a study of how many he tied down, but it must have been in the thousands. And those were thousands who were kept busy and were thus unable to free Cornwallis from being defeated.
The word was that our entire northern army has been annihilated.
And you have done nothing.
Who is this person who speaks to me as though I needed his advice?
Who is this person who speaks to me as though I needed his advice?
Well, tell me, what would you recommend in the present situation? Throws him out the window.
They diplomatically refer to that as defenestration.
Tell me something. Can you fly?
Can you fly, Bobby?
You better start flapping your wings, boy.
Cock-a-doodle-doo, bitch.
My God.
So yeah, I mean, basically, even after there were still some skirmishes that went on. Marion won his last battle at a place called Wad. They have such funny names. Wadboo Plantation near Charleston on August 29th. So he was still having some fights that late after the war was essentially over, August 29th, 1782. Now, obviously, the Treaty of Paris was in 1783 when Britain finally recognized their independence, but still. And then he went back to his farm, and he lived 13 more years, dying on February 27th, 1795, and like he
It's like whom shall I send? Not me. If I fell into the hands of that murderer, it might be my head in a basket, and not my gentle son. The mere sight of him would only encourage an enemy to take over the whole country.
So I mean, he never. I mean, this guy's just amazing, especially the more that I read about him. And it was really only a period of 2 years when he was really engaged. He was attached to like the regular army for the first, seems like first 4 years of the war. And then once we lost Charleston and Savannah, that's when he kind of went into Rambo mode. And, you know, he started having flashbacks of the French and Indian War, especially on the frontier fights of the Cherokees. And then maybe every British he saw was just another Cherokee to him. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Does any of the text mention, any of his offspring involved in the fighting or his militia or anything like that?
Like his men?
No, any of his offspring, like any of his children.
He didn't have children.
He didn't have children, so that was a fabrication in the movie.
Yeah, no, that kind of sucks. So no one to care. I mean, I'm sure he has collateral descendants, but no direct descendants.
Yeah.
No, so yeah, that was of course a fabrication.
His wife dies early on, and then later during the war, he hooks up with his wife's sister.
As one is expected to do.
In that time period, that wasn't as uncommon as you might think.
It was very common, and I think it's
actually
a biblical principle. So,
is it?
I think that's probably why it was acceptable at the time.
So it was common in the Bible.
It was common that fairly. I wouldn't say it happened in every case, but the wife died in childbirth. Say it wasn't uncommon for the man to involve with one of the wife's siblings.
Right. No, so his widow well, of course she was a widow, so she survived him. I don't know by how many years, but this is after America gained independence. So yeah, so that was obviously a fabrication, obviously meant to show the just dramatic what do you call it? Dramatic something.
I don't know. Just drama.
Yeah, just
probably
adding to the excitement of the movie.
Yeah, humanizing in the family standpoint.
Blandishments.
Just adds to the story a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I again, going off of this what this person is saying, yeah, it just I think it wasn't just the direct victories. It was also, again, I didn't even think about that until just discussing it. Tying up thousands of Brits, preventing them from going north. I mean, that was key. Like if all those guys had been freed up, like if that, and we'll have to talk about King's Mountain another time because that was another. I've been to that battlefield before. It's pretty cool.
I'm curious, and something that we should talk about because I honestly don't know. Were there any major battles fought in Maine?
You had the Battle of Machias, which I think was like a sea battle or landing battle. Amphibious assault battle, I mean.
Tim, that Maine would be a nightmare to assault amphibiously.
Well, yeah, because it has
no beach, just rocks. It's just rocky cliffs.
All they have to do is roll rocks down on you.
Well,
Yeah.
there's very few spots where to make a beach landing. You know, you can't assaulting rocks from being dashed, your landing boats being dashed on the rocks.
Yeah.
It's not tenable.
Yeah, Maine would be a nightmare for an amphibious landing.
Yeah, I mean, there was the Battle of Machias that was pretty early on in 1775. Patriot forces captured a British schooner and apparently killed the British commanding officer. It was pretty small though, and actually it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory because we suffered more killed than they did. But it was a small.
Well, in 1775, that was before the official Declaration of Independence and Declaration of War. I mean,
Well, that was June 11th and 12th. So
right. So I mean, you would think once word got back to the crown about American rebels taking a British ship and killing the commanding officer, you would think that would have been grounds for the British crown to declare war right there, like this.
Well,
it's on.
The British probably didn't even know who did it.
Well, actually this was 5 days before Bunker Hill too. So Bunker Hill was the one that really kicked off the whole party. So
Yeah. What about?
I doubt the Battle of Machias would have led to much consternation versus the Battle of Bunker Hill.
What about the battle? What about the Battle of Baden Hill? He personally wet himself at the Battle of Baden Hill.
No, Bunker Hill is the one where the famous quote of "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes" came from, right?
Yeah. And so to answer your question, and I actually had two ancestors at Bunker Hill. So you had the burning of Falmouth. Falmouth was actually burned down on October 18th, 1775.
Falmouth what? Maine?
Falmouth. Well, yeah, I mean, then Massachusetts. And actually, it's technically the site of modern Portland. So technically, it's Portland that was burned.
So they burned Portland. Okay.
Yeah. There was a naval bombardment which included incendiary shot and then a landing party meant to complete the town's destruction. So
and afterwards they incurred the wrath of the Mainer, and they quickly learned that it wasn't smart to piss off Maine.
Yeah, and they heard a bunch of Mainers coming from the fucking hills and the woods going, yeah.
And actually, there was a battle again at Machias in 1777 in an amphibious landing, and it was kind of a pitched battle. Apparently, both sides were claiming victory. So, three frigates.
Right, we'll call it a draw.
I mean, Maine was actually more important, I'd say, Benedict Arnold, because where I used to live, where my mom used to live, there's a historic house there called the Coburn House. And it was the site of his headquarters for launching the invasion of Quebec up the Kennebec River. But Maine was actually probably more so important, I'd say, even in the French and Indian War, where having the frontier forts to prevent Indian and French raids. Because Maine was just not that important. Actually, in the War of 1812, a lot of people don't know this, but there was a portion of Maine that was occupied for 3 or 4 years after that war actually ended. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it's kind of fascinating because they just kind of held on to it and didn't give it up for like 6 years or something.
So in other words, they were squatters. They just kind of sat there and hoped no one would notice.
Yeah, anybody remember that? Was it like a year ago, that conspiracy theory that was like there were like 20,000 Chinese troops in eastern Maine, like hanging out?
Yeah, that they had been blown up.
Yep.
Oh, but actually, this is kind of a fun thing because the British occupied territory in Maine they called New Ireland.
Oh God.
Well,
Were they Irish, British?
there were a lot of Irish settlers there, so
They sent their Irish conscripts there to just kind of squat on Maine territory. Well, Massachusetts territory. It wasn't really Maine then, but
Actually, I think we should just have a Maine-centric episode one of these times, but include War of 1812 and the Revolution.
mhm.
Because they're like in the War of 1812, Bangor was sacked. There was a Battle of Hampden. Yeah, Hampden. Um, yeah, I didn't know Bangor got sacked.
Did they sack?
oh, so the Battle of Hampton. Hampton is like just like on the south side of Bangor. I
Yeah,
know where
so
Hampton is.
Did they sack Mexico and China, Maine?
well they
I don't think
actually
Mexico and China, Maine were Mexico and China, Maine. Then.
I don't think white people knew what China was in 1815.
Well, I mean, they might have known what it was, but I doubt they had any contact with them.
Not your regular pre-Maine Mainer living in the
Right.
Massachusetts at the time.
You
Your
said
average
China. What the hell is China?
is that the stuff we eat off of, Ma?
Not my good China.
The China.
China.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah, but
God.
actually the British occupied Castine. They actually occupied a pretty substantial territory along the Penobscot.
So, in conclusion, well, not
Yeah.
in conclusion, but let's just say like, well, a little offshoot. So, Francis Marion's exploits in the South. If Francis Marion, in conjunction with the Patriot forces in the South, if they had been unsuccessful in stopping or slowing Cornwallis, it's conceivable that Cornwallis could have moved north and kept pushing north, and eventually rolled up Washington's flanks and destroyed the revolution entirely.
Absolutely, because I think the idea was for him to link up with the Crown occupied New York City where they had a stronghold.
Right.
I
So
mean, they were
keeping him tied up in the South was imperative.
yeah, because like look at like the Civil War, for example, when like the Southerners in the East, I mean in the West, which the West at that time meant Tennessee, like how in Mississippi, how they got thoroughly rolled by Grant. Like look what
Yeah.
happened there. Their failures to stop Grant led to their defeat. I mean, it's just that simple. So yeah, if
Right, because
Marion
it allowed reinforcements to move to the east once they were thoroughly defeated, and then
yeah.
it was just a matter of time.
The Lord tells
So
me.
yeah, I think it's thoroughly conceivable. I mean, obviously Washington.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
obviously Washington was his own tactical genius, but I don't know. I don't know if I'd love to see a side by side comparison of Washington's tactics, especially during the 10 crucial
Right.
days, which we discussed a few weeks ago,
Yeah,
and what
but
Marion did in the Carolinas.
even tactically, being the tactician that Washington was, I have my doubts that he would have been able to stop a force under Cornwallis, as well as the force that he was already facing.
Yep.
So,
Look, it's kind of like Robert E. Lee and Stone. And actually, I think Stonewall Jackson was a superior tactician to Lee, honestly. But it's like you can only be so successful on your own for so long. Eventually, you need competent subordinates who can hold their own too. And that's what Washington had. He was blessed with competent subordinates who, like Marion. And frankly, I don't know if they ever met. I didn't see anything about that. Maybe they did at Yorktown or somewhere else. Actually, he wasn't at Yorktown, so maybe they never met. I don't know. I'm sure Washington heard about him, but
yeah, Washington was more in the north anyway. I mean, how often did he visit the Southern Theater? I
not
mean, I
really,
don't.
dude. I mean, and that's the funny thing about it. He's a Virginian, but he was mostly fighting in like he actually laid siege to Boston. Like we actually drove the British out of Boston pretty early on. Henry Knox was key in that with his train of artillery from Ticonderoga.
Washington was more or less Maryland north.
Yeah, yeah,
Maryland to the north.
yeah, because
You know,
So yeah, no, but that's the thing. Like that's where Robert E. Lee went wrong because like he did find like at some point you need to be able to rely on other people in other areas of the camp, other theaters of war. So in the Southern theater, Marion and others were holding their own, as well as the other Patriot guerrillas, and then that freed up Washington to clean up Cornwallis in Virginia. Lee did not have that and I'm not trying to compare the two, just thinking about how those situations played out. It's like obvious that like the Western Confederates were fucking losers. They couldn't hold their own.
Yeah. I mean, which you would think it would be the opposite because I mean, they would have been frontiersmen, they would have been outdoorsmen, used to battling with the natives and guerrilla tactics. You would think that they would have held a lot
Or
more
or remember
sway.
in the West, they were primarily dealing with a lot of like frontiersmen themselves, like Illinoisans at the time were mostly frontier, Wisconsinites, Michiganders.
Yeah, so I mean, you would think that they would have
Pretty
been
even, pretty even
battle
fight actually.
hardened, battle hardened guerrilla warfare veterans before the Civil War ever kicked off. But
Now the only advantage Southerners would have had was from having the experience in the Mexican War, because they had like thousands of Tennesseans who fought in that war. Tennesseans, Kentuckians, men who got some serious campaigning in Mexico, but obviously that was like what, like 15 years before the Civil War kicked off. So
yeah, something like that. The Mexican War was what,
46 to
1840?
46 to 48.
Yeah, so 2 years, 46 to 48.
In our entire history, people just won't leave us alone. I mean, we average a major war every 20 years since the founding of this country.
Well, they want to keep poking the bear, and you fuck with the bull, you're going to get the horns. I mean,
Well, to be fair, that was probably an unjust war to start with because the whole it kicked off when there was an attack on American troops who were probably below our territory in the Rio Grande. And then we tried lying about it and saying that was actually on American territory.
Well, Santa Anna shouldn't have been starting shit he wasn't prepared to finish.
well, I mean, the United States has, they've never shied away from fabricating an event to justify getting into a war that they've wanted to get into for a while. So, I mean, look at
Offered
the
without comment.
USS Maine as case in point. I
Yep.
mean,
Gulf of Tonkin. The Gulf of
the
Tonkin.
Gulf of Tonkin. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, probably the only thoroughly just, like, even the revolution's probably a little dicey, to be honest with you, because obviously, I mean, hypothetically, the British did have a right, I would think, to raise taxes to, to pay for the exorbitant cost of the French and Indian War. But obviously, the problem with them was like by that time, we had pretty much been an autonomous nation for like 100 years because it was mostly the colonies were mostly governed by governors and town councils that had dealt with their own business and raising their own taxes.
Right.
Like, so it wasn't like in old England where you had a lord, overseeing the large estate. Like they didn't have that really in the colonies. And maybe that's where they fucked up because looking at our lackadaisical population today, they should have just thought about handing out people welfare checks to make them passive.
Well,
Yeah, way back then.
The American government learned that lesson because everybody gets welfare now in one form or another.
Yep, they sure did. And all you have to do is keep the presses going.
Yep. Keep that fresh print coming.
But I mean, that's
Yeah.
why I think we're talking about people like Marion or Washington, any of them. We can and will discuss numerous heroes, and occasionally I'm sure we'll talk about some villains too from that time period because we need to remember these people and apply their courage, their stories to our lives. Because I personally believe that when people like read their stories and their exploits and just what they accomplished, I think that can get a lot of people out of the ruts that they're in their life. Because if you're like, man, I might have it rough, but these people are inspiring. They overcame odds. I love that. I'm going to try to emulate that. I think if more people did that, a lot
We
of people
wouldn't.
would be better off.
People seem to forget that. I mean, you have it pretty fucking good as an American being born here. You have to remember, you wouldn't have any of the shit that you have if it
Yep.
wasn't for these people.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, whether they own slaves or not.
Yeah, and I don't even, because, you know, the funny thing about that, and actually that would be an interesting topic for another time, is the fact that slavery is so like intertwined into the whole history of the entire, like it goes back to prehistory, first of all,
Oh, and it's still going
like,
on today.
and it's still, yeah, it's not even over. And
Honestly,
secondly, like there
honestly,
there were,
if the United States didn't exist, if the revolution ever happened, the US didn't exist. I mean, I'm not convinced that the world wouldn't be a desolate wasteland right now, devoid of any life
I
at
mean,
the rate it
obviously
was
we're
going.
heading in that direction now, but maybe it would have
Right,
happened much sooner.
but but for but for 100 years, over 100 years, the U.S. has been the only force in the world standing between annihilation.
Yeah, overall, we're I mean, we had a good run. Well, at this point, I say we've had a good run, but I mean, because here's the thing, like even if there's no like America in its present form, there's still American liberty, and that's actually something Patrick Henry made note of in a speech. He actually made a distinction between American Union and American liberty, and it's not necessarily one and the same. Like even if we didn't have 50 states, which look, I'd be happy to kick out some states at this point, or at least cities, and let them become, you know, independent city states so we can be devoid of them. But liberty would survive regardless because it's not tied to this this landmass. It's a state of mind really. So
For me, like the only real issue I have with like say kicking out the whole West Coast, kicking them out of the Union, right? That leaves a pretty powerful force to your west that could be a threat one day.
well here's the thing, you wouldn't even have like you wouldn't have to kick out the whole West Coast because you look at like Washington and Oregon, for example, the
They're worse
vast
than
majority of the
California.
land, yeah, the vast majority of the landmass is red.
That's a big thing though, because if like
Actually, look at the actually case in point, look at the recent election results from Oregon. Like the vast majority of the state, blood red. But because people are jam packed into Portland and Eugene, that won the day. That was it. That's
right,
why.
It's the same thing in California.
Washington State probably the same.
Oh, it is. It is.
Seattle, and shit like that. I mean,
I lived north of Seattle for a time.
Maine, Maine's the same shit. The whole state of Maine is blood red, and you have the blue counties of Cumberland, York, and like Kennebec.
Washington. Yeah, Kennebec. Well, no,
Kennebec,
Kennebec's actually not that blue, man. Not as
yeah,
much.
but they're the one that's Augusta, and they're fucking liberal hippies. So I mean,
And actually,
I
that
don't
that
know.
would be an interesting. This would be an interesting discussion for another time because there's a whole movement, especially it's kind of being led by Oregonians right now, conservative Oregonians, to secede from Portland and join Idaho. So they're not talking about forming their own country, but they're talking about state realignment. And like they've actually had votes on this. Most of the East is voting to join Idaho, and they're actually pushing both legislatures to consider it. So I think it'd be a very interesting topic for another time on realignment of states.
Well,
Like, cause I
speaking of this, like, you know how we're saying, like, the The only blue places are the cities,
For the most part, that's true. Yeah.
mostly. So it's no wonder to me that the left here all around the world, and I think it's starting now in Australia. Have you heard about this? The 15-minute city? That's
Yeah.
their
The
plan.
15-minute city? No.
It's called the 15-minute city. So basically, you're only allowed, like everything that you will need to survive your work, stores, whatever, will be within a 15-minute walk from your home. And you're not allowed to go outside of that 15-minute perimeter.
The hell?
Yep.
Yeah, and you got to have like special passports and all kinds of shit and permissions to leave that vicinity.
Yeah, they'll allow you to travel outside of that vicinity. I think it was 3 times in your life, in your entire life.
Well, and here's the thing. This is why I'm such a big proponent of state realignment. So just to be very clear, I don't support the actual dissolution of the country. I think here's what's mostly driving our divisions. And again, I think this is a great topic for another time. But what's mostly driving our divisions is the loss of federalism. Because we're supposed to be a voluntary union of sovereign states. And the states are supposed to be sovereign over the federal government, with exception for a few issues. And the Constitution actually specifies in Article 1, Section 10, powers prohibited to the state, prohibited against the states. And it's a very small list. So, and God, I'm glad that slavery's gone. I don't want people to misinterpret me. But look, we did lose our federalist republic after the Civil War. Like we did lose that. It died. We became, that was the first major fourth turning in our country's history, was the Civil War. That was our first major change after the Revolution. So now every 4 years, what do we do? Ever since basically the Civil War, every 4 years, both sides try desperately to win an election so we can do what? Force our values on the other side and, force it down their throats and violate them essentially. And because so it's the domestic policies that are causing a potential civil war in this country, like abortion, guns, you name it.
You know what my values are? Leave me the fuck alone.
Well, and that's the problem though. Because
Those are
they
my
can't.
values. Leave me alone.
I know,
That's the
but they
thing
can't.
Abortion won't spark a civil war. Guns will.
Well, and I
When
agree with
they
that.
come
I
and
agree
try
with.
to take the guns, that's going to be it.
Well, I agree with that because even I mean, look, slavery was basically, I mean, slavery along with tariffs and economic issues sparked the because slavery. I know people don't like to hear this, but it also was an economic issue because it was a billion-dollar industry. So you're not going to get rid of a billion-dollar industry without sparking a fist fight. But yeah, no, I agree because abortion is big business. But yeah, I agree. Guns are going to be the bigger issue. But that's my point. We're at each other's throats over domestic issues. Like most people aren't at each other's throats over foreign policy. Like a liberal doesn't go screaming in someone's face because I fucking hate you because of your support for uh financial aid to this foreign country. That's not why people are screaming in your face. It's over guns. It's over.
No. 9 times out of 10, liberals are the ones that are wanting to give all our money to foreign countries and not take care of our own.
It's over your refusal to comply with certain unlawful mandates that the government likes to give out.
But that just goes to my point. We're at each other's throats because of domestic issues. And so Mises Institute, it's a great libertarian think tank. I honestly recommend everyone read it. They have fantastic articles on like the 10th Amendment, obviously economics because they're libertarian. But they had a great article a few years ago talking about halfway to secession, disunity on domestic policy, unity on like national defense or foreign policy. So they're not talking. This article wasn't calling for the dissolution of the country, which I don't support, but it was saying, hey, on domestic issues, let's go our own way. California should be able to do whatever with its policies. Alabama does whatever with its policies. Like, we're not
That's
going
the
to force
thing
each other.
that's the thing is we need to get rid of a lot of it. You know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, a good portion of the amendments past the 10th can go. A good portion of them can go because, I mean, what's the 10th Amendment do?
I mean, that's power to the
It
states
kicks
or
it
to
to
the
the
people.
states. Absolutely. It kicks it to the states. So,
Well, yeah.
I mean, what more do you need beyond that?
I
Like,
mean, and it's,
if you're in a
yeah.
state that doesn't allow something, well, move to a state that does.
Well, and see, that's the whole thing. Because I will say this, like, people, not everyone, it irritates me. We're like, oh, I'm moving to Florida or Texas. Millions of people cannot do that. Like, that's not feasible, and that's going to kill those states with overpopulation. But that's why I think the best movement today is this whole state realignment issue. Because look, I think at the end of the day, what we should become is a loose military confederation. We just basically say we all constitutionally agree to protect each other in the case of an invasion. That's it. That's the only thing we have in common. If California wants people shitting in the streets and wants abortion on demand, which they just basically agreed to this past election cycle, look, I don't want to
Right.
force
You agree for a mutual defense.
Yeah, and that's it.
You agree to keep
Bam.
you agree to keep state borders open within the Confederation's borders.
I don't even know about that.
So people can move freely between the states if they so desire. And, keep trade open, free trade, free market. But that's it, right? I mean,
No common domestic policies.
Yeah, but see, the liberals of today don't like free market.
Well, no, and actually, no, look, because I think, for example, like Arkansas, for example, should say, okay, they should be able to say whether a person can move there or not, honestly, I believe. Like, if I'm the governor of Arkansas or some other, like West Virginia, and a Californian is moving to my state, I want to see that person's voting history and their social media posts. I do.
right.
And it's like, no, you're.
I want to see that person's criminal record. Oh, this guy's a fucking child molester from Maine. He ain't moving here.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because look, because
We
I
don't
know this
want
is
him.
where I run foul of basically every libertarian, but it's like liberty is not like an independent entity. It's not a self-regulating natural entity. Liberty needs defense. You actually have to defend liberty if you want to live it. Like, it's not just going to exist by itself. And that's where I get pissed off at a lot of libertarians who just think that, like, liberty is just going to randomly sprout and happen. It's like, no, it doesn't happen that way.
And here's
You
something
have to protect liberty.
Here's something I disagree with a lot of libertarians, where they believe that, once a person is like convicted felons, like once they've done their time and paid their debt to society, that they should have all their rights restored, like their right to own a firearm. No, if you're convicted of a violent crime, I don't think that you should be allowed to have a firearm.
See, and that's the thing. It's like, unfortunately, they're kind of bad on some issues, just as bad on some issues as the left is, which is like, I'm sure that they don't intend to, but I think that's where it naturally goes. Here's where I am at the end of the day. It's like, we have a decentralization of power, state realignments, loose military confederation, because while I believe in abolishing like federal tyranny, like I don't believe in anarchy, like in my family, for example, or even in the like I think like Mises Institute even had a great video recently where they talked about having 1,000 states. Maybe we need 1,000 states. Maybe we need 10,000 states. I don't know.
Actually, I was going to mention that. I really hope that this movement, I really hope this movement in California goes somewhere to break California up into like 7 different states.
That's like what Jesse Ventura has always said, like on his show and everything. Like they ask him about his political affiliation. He says, I'm a libertarian with a small L. He's like, I'm not a capital L libertarian. I'm a small L libertarian. He's like, I agree with a lot of it, but some of it,
I mean, and yeah, look, you're never gonna have 100. Like, if you have 100% agreement with something, you're probably not thinking it through. Like, I think you're gonna find ideals that are good from most movements. Obviously, not socialism, for example, or Marxism, but unless you're talking about brutalizing your opponents, and they have some, then they have some tips there. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think libertarians and conservatives are just gonna have to swallow a pill. We're gonna have to end up all working together, because at the end of the day, like, libertarians aren't gonna hopefully have too much common cause with the left. I wouldn't imagine.
No, they have
no, I
more.
don't
They
think
have more
so.
common cause with the right than they do with the left.
Because frankly, I'd love to see them, acknowledge that, so they can maybe, because conservatives at least are mostly open-minded people. We're not closed-minded bigots. So I
No,
think we're pretty
the
amenable
left,
to good arguments.
right, and the left are absolutely, think like I do, and if not, I'm going to shout you down and possibly physically attack you, and probably might try to kill you.
Which again,
And that's the
which
left.
again, yeah, that's what they are. Because and it's like after Roe was overturned, which was a wonderful act of federalism, actually. Because again, 10th Amendment, there's nothing about healthcare for the federal government, and abortion they like to say is healthcare. So there's nothing about the federal government and abortion and healthcare.
I
So it
love
was
it how they like
federalism.
to try to fucking tell you that their right to abort and kill their child is a God-given right, like it's one of the inalienable rights that are God-given
But
rights. Like, get the fuck out of here. God is totally against abortion. All you gotta do is read a cursory passage in the Bible to understand that. It's not fucking hard.
But I mean, it was a restoration, like, and it was just an opening shot. I hope they do more, but like, and just I guess to time up my comments about it all, the men of 1776 did not fight a tyrannical government just to have it replaced with a tyrannical government. Like, they fought for, in even then, it's possible that the Constitution that we have, that was in place, is not what they even envisioned in 1776. So at the end of the day, maybe we're looking back more towards returning to kind of an Articles of Confederation, of just even weakening it further.
Well,
Because
I
I
would
think,
think that the Constitution they envisioned in 1776 was the Constitution they wrote. I mean, which is nothing even, it's a ghostly outline of the Constitution they wrote now. There ain't much, ain't a whole lot left of it.
Well, there ain't a
There's
whole
some,
lot left of it because they keep amending it away and friggin' ignoring what they amended.
so yeah, that's why people need to read about these guys, apply their values, find courage in their, find strength in the courage that these men had. Because I think if people did that, we'd have a lot more brave people right now, not being so terrified of these little multicolored haired psychopaths. So
well, I'm just gonna say, just to reiterate on what I said earlier, you know, the guns. That will be when it happens. That will be the trigger for the Civil War 2.0. Guns
well, again,
guns
because
will be the issue, and I'm telling you, good patriots like me are not going to give them up.
as a
I'm
Christian,
going
like,
to tell them
yeah,
publicly, and I'll tell them publicly right now, come and take them.
well, because as a Christian, I try to live by Christ's word. So he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." So that's why for me, I want to avoid all this as much as possible. So it's like state realignment again avoids all this. Because like in shitty, metropolitan areas that would be relatively self-governing on domestic policies, they can do whatever the hell they want. I don't care. As long as they're just governing their people in their little North Koreas, I don't give a shit what they do
Hey,
in
Ben.
their
Well, it's
little side.
unfortunate, but it's the world we live in, that peace and liberty are
It's just reality.
Hey, you know what?
in
We need
blood.
to hire somebody to serve the federal government with divorce papers. And where it says for a reason, we need to write irreconcilable differences.
Right.
Well, most states are no fault divorce these days.
Peace and liberty are paid for in blood. No other way.
Yeah, but you know
And
what?
that's true. I prefer, because I've even had some conversations with some left-minded individuals who, once I somehow managed to break into the issue of intellectual integrity, it's like, let me pose it to you this way. Let's say a bunch of, like, a radical conservative from Alabama took over the government. Would you want that conservative from Alabama imposing his views on, say, the people of San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles? And they're like, fuck no. So it's like, okay, so take that viewpoint, now put it in reverse. Why should you be forcing California views on people in Tennessee, West Virginia, places like that? Just be intellectually honest. And I at least with a few people, I've had some not I don't like I don't want to say political breakthroughs, but philosophical breakthroughs. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's like, when I explained it like that, when you had a real face-to-face, down-to-earth conversation explaining the benefits of it all, it was like an epiphany. So I think at the ground level, there's actually a lot of people who'd be amenable to just having these kind of divides where, look, we don't have to coexist. We can trade with each other, but we don't have to force each other's views. And I think that'd be fitting with the spirit of the American Revolution, which is what we need to get back to. And that's why we talk about Francis Marion and Washington and the others, because we need to return to the spirit of the revolution.
It's like the other thing, though, what I was just thinking, the last time we had a secession movement, we had a civil war. Is there any reason to think that it would be any different this time around?
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. So many people died because they didn't want to lose the tax revenue. So I mean, at the same time, the leftists today boast that, oh, our states are the producers. So the states, and again, I'm not talking about secession. I'm talking about state realignments, and we maintain a military union. That's it.
I
So
think
I'm
you'd
not
have a
talking about.
hard time. I think you'd have a hard time now finding American soldiers willing to go and
Fight
do
other
battle
Americans.
against other Americans for any reason.
What? Yeah, because, well, look, yeah, because again, I'm not some people do talk about secession. I don't think it's necessary. I think if we just, because that's the thing, like, the only people who also usually talk about bloodshed are probably glowies and Ray Ep types. Like, those
Right.
are, they're sitting in their bunker basement with their FBI members only jacket,
dude,
and like, oh
did
yeah,
you
I'm a
hear-
patriot.
Did you hear they caught Ray Epps? They caught him. They caught him on a phone call with his son, bragging about how he orchestrated the entire January 6th thing outside.
I mean, yeah, the guy's a glowy, or he was paid by the glowies, because
Yeah, but they have him on tape admitting it.
He was.
I mean, they had him on tape.
He was a plant. He was there to make something happen that wasn't going to happen. That's all he was. He was a plant.
Same with the Michigan kidnapping plot. Same with so many other things. Glowies.
Greta Thunberg.
And see, that's the way.
Other than him and his small band of misfits at January 6th, that protest was exactly that, a protest. It was people singing, holding hands, praying, doing the thing that God-fearing Americans do. It was not by any means violent, other than his little merry band of misfits that went into the Capitol and started their horse shit.
Yeah.
But they spun that to make it look like they're all fucking were like that, and honestly, the people that actually went into the Capitol and the people that did the shit that gave it all the bad name weren't even Trump supporters. They were Antifa. They were Antifa plants dressed as Trump supporters.
They arrested everybody they had on camera there, and they're still rotting in a DC fucking gulag to this day with no trial.
They arrested people that never even went into the Capitol. There's people sitting there in jail.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Anybody they have their face on tape.
Lawn. They weren't even in there. They were on the lawn singing and praying with their friends.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the fact that they're still in jail with no trial is a violation of the Constitution in and of itself.
Yeah. Ben, did you
And
ever
that's the thing,
did
like,
you ever think you'd live to see the day that you'd have political prisoners in the United States?
I mean, and that's the thing. Like, we do have a government that is
Tyrannical.
is worthy of King George's name. And actually, I have to say this, between the two, I'd prefer to have King George, because even though he was a tyrant, he didn't willingly destroy his own kingdom. Like,
Yeah, even though he was called the Mad King, I mean, he wasn't. I mean,
like he didn't destroy his own kingdom at the behest of Spain or France or some other power, for example. Like he put British interests first. It might have been the mercantilist, classist interests, but it still wasn't the interest of foreign adversaries.
Right. And
Britain first.
Today you have Dementia Joe destroying the United States at the behest of China. So
Britain first? Who'd have thunk it?
And on that note, that's probably a good spot here. We've gone far afield from Francis Marion.
we sure have.
You have wandered way off course.
A good conversation nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think we covered Francis Marion pretty well, I'd say. Or you did, anyway.
Well, no, I was just, talking about the highlights, and we were relaying other stories about it. Yeah, it was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think this is where I say where you can hit us up if you feel like it. Although I don't know why I do that anymore.
Why not?
Squeal, boy, squeal.
You feel like hitting us up, you can hit us on the email, supernaturalbeerbros@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram. Hit up our DMs on SBB Pod. And we're on all the major podcast platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, look, if you feel brave enough, if you've listened this long, send us some ideas for some history hour topics.
Send us some supernatural ideas too. I'm out of ideas.
Yeah, send us some ideas. Even send us if you'd like to be a part of it. Maybe if you have something very compelling to add to a conversation, we may have you on the podcast. We can all have a conversation.
That'd be nice. I always like talking.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah.
Especially if you're. How about this? If you're of the liberal mindset, maybe you can come on and debate us one night. We could have a little friendly debate. We'll just
tussle.
Yeah, I could see
we'll
that.
Compare ideas and see if we can find common ground anywhere.
I could see that going horribly wrong.
Yeah, let's have that on April 1st.
Yeah. We're fucking you.
All right, so this has been Beer Bros History Hour, and we are signing out.